Now that we have our AWS account created and the common tools that we need to launch and connect to our resources, we can become users of the platform. Remember to pause the video frequently as you replicate the actions you see in the video. Let's access our management console. And we're going to use some EC2 virtual servers. You start out by seeing the EC2 dashboard, which is a nice view, but we're going to go look at the instances list. Something to keep in mind as you look at your EC2 resources is that the EC2 management console does not have a unified view of all of your assets. You have to select each region in turn to see what resources are being utilized. So here we're looking at an EC2 resource that is running in the Northern California region. As you can see, you can also select from data centers that are in Northern Virginia, Oregon, EU, etc. Stick with US West for now. Here's a quick review of some of the information you'll see here. Name. You don't need to name each instance, but for our purposes it helps. Instance type, which is basically the size and therefore the cost of the resource being used. If you're trying to stay within the free tier promotional offer during the first year, you need to see no more than 2 micro instances here. One will be Linux, one will be Windows. Availability zone. To help users design their architecture to be fault tolerant, each region is further compartmentalized into physically separated availability zones. Instance state. This is something that will be demonstrated later, but primarily we're looking at states of stopped, which means that billing on that resource is stopped and it's virtually shut down. If there's an EBS storage volume attached, the content will be available when you restart it. Stopping and starting an EC2 instance is a good example of the pay only for what you use feature of AWS. The parameters that you set upon launch of that instance will remain the same when you start it again. Behind the scenes, you might be assigned a different virtual instance and hence a different public DNS, but to you, it's like your box firing up again. The state of terminated is used when the billing on that resource is also stopped, but unlike the stop state, you're basically telling the system that you're done using the instance parameters and all the content you had on that terminated instance. Terminated instances will stick around for a little while on the console, but will eventually drop off. Key name. This is the encrypt access key, which consists of a public key and a private key that will be used with PuTTY and a remote desktop connection to securely access your instance. And security groups. This is where you set your ports, and for the purposes of this demo, we're going to lock them down to only our IP address. Let's launch a Windows instance. Every server has to have some software image on it, and there are some default AMI or Amazon Machine images provided for that purpose. Let's stick within the free tier, so find an AMI that is eligible for the free tier program. Here's one that looks good. Key thing we're looking for here is that the size is a T1 micro because we want to stay within the free tier. We're only launching one. And here they remind you that the network performance is very low. This is the smallest sized instance and is going to be the most underpowered of them. Let's configure the instance details. This is just a walkthrough, so all we're looking for here is that the number of instances is 1. Here's where they display the EBS storage that will be assigned. You can tag an instance with all kinds of things, but for our purposes, let's just give it a name. How about Windows Micro Walkthrough? Configure security group. The wizard here is automatically recognizing that as a Windows instance, it needs to use this RDP protocol, which is the 3389. It defaults to so-called open to the world, and you want to lock that down to only your IP address. Let's review and launch. Our port settings are in place, but we now need our public and private key. Let's create a new key pair. System requires a name, so let's call it Sandbox1. And this is something that we'll download to our desktop. And here's our file, and if we take a look at it, I see an encrypted key file with a .pem extension. When I open it up, I see this massive encrypted key. Now that I have the key safely tucked away, I can launch the instance. Okay, so my Windows instance is launched, but I can't connect to it right away because Windows takes up to 30 minutes to generate the password that you need to access using your remote desktop connection. So we're going to launch a Linux instance while we're waiting. First, let's get rid of this placeholder Linux instance I just used to show the column names before we launch the Windows instance. And this is where I'm going to terminate it. While it's doing that, we'll launch the other instance. So the same principle applies, and in this case, we're going to find the Amazon Linux AMI. We'll just use this one. So micro quantity 1. There's your EBS information. Let's tag this one with the name of Linux Micro Walkthrough. Now, unlike the Windows instance that configured with a 3389 port range, you SSH into a Linux instance and uses the port range of 22. And once again, let's lock that down to my IP address. Rather than creating a new key pair, we can choose an existing key pair. And what the system will do is make you acknowledge that if you don't have that key pair saved somewhere, you're not going to be able to access your instance because it requires that private key to match up with the public one that it greets with. So click your acknowledgement, go ahead and launch it. Okay, so Linux spins up much faster, so we should be able to get access to our Linux resource right away. A Linux instance, when you connect to it, will give you the options on how to do it. There is a Java client that you can use, but we're not going to use it for the purpose of this demo. Instead, we're going to use PuTTY, which is very common. So I don't have anything that I need here. I'm going to close out of this dialog box. When you installed your PuTTY set of applications, you will have loaded a program called PuTTY Key Generator. It's going to look like this in your Start menu. So call that up now. PuTTY does not natively support the key formatted generated by Amazon EC2. That was that .pem file we downloaded. PuTTY can convert the PEM file into a private key that it can use. Once you pull up the application, and since it's looking for PPK files, you want to click on the All Files option. There's your PEM file. Now, make sure it's SSH-2RSA as a parameter, and you can save your private key now. You don't need a passphrase for the purposes of this demo. Use the same name as you use for a PEM file. There it is. We don't want it to be PEM anymore. PuTTY will convert that to a PPK for us. Okay, so here's our original EC2 created PEM file. Here's our private key that is the PPK compatible file. Now we can launch PuTTY. For this particular Linux AMI, the username is ec2-user. Make sure you're connecting with port 22 on SSH, and the @ is just the public DNS of the instance you're trying to remote into. So let's go find that. Here's your public DNS. We're going to copy that. Put that into your host name. And now you got to get your authentication, and let's browse for it. Here it is in the download folder. Open. You can save these sessions, but for our purposes, we're not going to. So let's open it up. You'll get a warning. If you trust this host, hit yes. Yes, I trust the host. And here we are. I'm communicating with a virtual instance that is in a data center located somewhere in Northern California. And let's just kind of go in here and do some simple commands to confirm that we have control here. So I'm going to make a directory. There it is. Now, I want to get that README file, I want to get that Hello World file and move that into Linux as a kind of like I'm pretending I'm deploying my content onto my virtual server. So how do I do that? It's time to use that WinSCP software that we loaded up. And here's what it's going to look like. Click on Session, and the connections are basically the same as what you used into PuTTY. Hostname was just this right here. Username was ec2 user. And let's grab your private key file. There it is. And we'll open it. You can save the session, but for our purposes, we're not going. And let's log in. Similar warning messages. Yep. Okay. Now we have a GUI-based system that looks a lot like Windows Explorer. You can use command line interface prompts on your Linux instance to do this. But for the purposes of this demo, I want to be able to demonstrate the dragging of the files back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy my one little file over to staging, and it'll copy it over there. Okay, was it successful? Let's check it out. Yep, there it is. And now I'm going to demonstrate a stop and then restart that will kind of demonstrate how you might get a different actual server behind the scenes when you do a stop and then a start. But for our purposes, it's pretty much the same because our content will still be there so long as it's backed up with an EBS volume, which for the purposes of this AMI, it is. Remember, this is a walkthrough, so we're getting our feet wet as quickly as possible, and from there, you use that to learn some other things. Okay, so here's our PuTTY, still running along. Let's see what happens when we shut down our instance. So I'm going to go Actions, and I'm going to stop it. I'm not going to terminate it. I'm just going to stop it. Okay. PuTTY gives me a failure error. It says the system is going down for power off now. So it is virtually powered down. Our content is going to be in the EBS volumes. Oop, click the wrong volumes. Let's go back to the instances. Let's see if it's stopped by now. It has. Now, let's hurry up and start it up. Did you notice that the public DNS has been removed? Which means there's a good chance we're not going to get the same actual real-life server. But to us, virtually speaking, it's still this instance ID because of the functionality you'll see here. So let's start it up. Okay, we have our DNS now. So PuTTY will require me to put in the correct new DNS. Yeah, let's open it up. Okay, so here we are on a different physical box. Let's see if our content's still there. There's a directory. There's our file. All right, let's go back and see if the Win instance had launched created a password such that we can use it. Notice the staging 7 is still hanging around in terminated status. It should disappear here pretty soon. Okay, so the Windows can use that native PEM file that EC2 generated for us. However, it needs to decrypt it. So let's go ahead and hit connect. And the design is kind of odd because the top thing is not what you click first. You click this first. So click get password. And remember I showed you that long key pair, that long file? We're going to go ahead and go grab that. We can cut and paste if we wanted to, but it's just as easy to choose the file from here. And we don't want the PPK. That's what PuTTY uses. We're going to use the native PEM. There's all that decrypted to, there's our password. Okay, so we're going to copy this password. And we're going to download the remote desktop file, which is really a configuration file. All right. And opening this file directly will give us a connection, but we want to set it up so that when we access the Windows instance, we want to be able to do a file sharing. We want to be able to transfer files, deploy files from our staging environment on our desktop to the instance. So let's open it up and edit the connection, or I'm sorry, the configuration file before we actually get started. So I'm going to open this thing up in the folder. This is our RDP. Let's edit it. And if you recall, the Linux instance required the username of ec2-user. For Windows, at least for this AMI, it requires the username of administrator. So let's go to the local resources, and you can choose what other resources you want for your advanced session, and we're going to choose all of our drives, which is, if we look at it, that's just everything. And let's hit OK. And you can save this, but let's just connect as is. This is where we get to put in our password. And standard kind of error message. Okay, and it takes a little while for this thing to get going. Okay, And for Windows user, this is a more kind of comforting slash familiar display because it looks like an actual computer now. I mean, for a Windows user who's used to a GUI. So let's go get my Hello World. If I launch this thing up, I'm going to spare you the navigation, but this is what it'll look like after I get to where I save my Hello World file. And here was the path that it was at. And here was these are all the files that we were working with. And here's our Hello World text. So let's drag this to, say, the desktop. Get rid of this. There, I've deployed my content. Hello World. There we go. Okay, so we have 2 running instances of the correct size that it should remain within the free tier. But let's put together a little safeguard that will let us know if we ever start accruing charges we didn't expect. So let's go ahead and close out of our windows. And we use a service called CloudWatch to set the alarm that will let us know if we start accruing a charge that we did not expect. CloudWatch. Okay, so here's the area we need. You can now use CloudWatch to monitor estimated charges. You have to go in the CloudWatch East region to do this. It's not a big deal. They just have it set up in a different region. So we're in Northern California with our instances. The CloudWatch measurements go in the US East region. You get, I believe, 10 free alarms per month. So if it fires once, that first one will be free and it'll let you know that you're getting a charge. So you'll be able to do something about it. So let's go ahead and go there now. And let's create an alarm. We want a billing metric, total estimated charge. That's the one. Let's go next. And let's give it a name and a description. And the alarm is fairly literal. So what we'll want to do is come up with something that's very easy to break if we go through the free tier. So say if within one period I get something more than 2 cents, and let's make a period be 1 hour. So 1 hour I get 2 cents or more charge, I want to be alerted. So when the state is an alarm, and you're creating an SNS topic here. Again, this is a walkthrough, so you don't have to get into the details on what these different services are, but we'll go to this other service by creating a topic here. So we're going to create the topic. And what's important about the send notification to is this is going to be the subject line in your email. So keep in mind this is something you get months later if you left your resources running and then all of a sudden the free tier program expired on you. So let's call it something like, okay, and let's put it in the, oops. And let's use the placeholder account I used for this. And this is the email address that you can use to send me questions or comments, feedback on the content. Okay, this is the start. So this will send an email. Oops, need a underscore there. Okay, it's been saved. Whenever you add a new destination, it will require confirmation. So I will have gotten an email to my email address that asks me to confirm the alarm setup. So I'm going to go to SNS just because it displays the setup a little bit better. So let's go to SNS. Okay, and here's my charges, and it's pending confirmation. So I'm going to grab the email and show it to you real quick. Okay, there's my email, and I'm going to confirm. Okay, it's live. And a cool thing about the CloudWatch alarms is that if you want to get an SMS the moment you start accruing a charge, if you're not expecting it, you can set that up too. So you go to your topic and you can add a subscription. So let's create the subscription. And in this case, we're going to go to SMS, and you can put in your number. And this is going to fail out because it's not a real number, but what it does when you subscribe and it works is you get a SMS to the phone number in question asking you to confirm from there, and then you can confirm it. And the cool thing about the phone SMS is if you're getting a lot of alarms and you want it to stop, you can just reply back with stop, and it will. Okay, so it's time to wrap it up. And whenever you want to check your account activity, you can do so by going to your account activity, and the summary information is shown. Interesting that really the only consolidated view of all of the regions together, if you're using different regions, can be found here. So what you're going to want to do is have a look at this connectivity summary today, and then tomorrow or the next day, go back there and check it again, and just make sure nothing's running or that you don't expect. But really, I mean, it's kind of good housekeeping. If you're just in here learning and you're kind of playing around, there's kind of no reason to leave these things running if you're not using them. It's kind of like leaving the lights on in a room if there's nobody in there. It's not hurting anything really, and it's within the free tier, but just to be safe, you might as well terminate them. Or actually, why not just stop them? So I'm going to select my instances, and let's stop them all at once. Oops. Stop. There we go. Now all billing is stopped. Will stop. So this concludes the training. If you have any questions or feedback, you can send them to sandbox1918@gmail.com. I'll try to make every effort I can to respond to your questions. Thank you.